In the last lecture, we saw how to use JavaScript code snippets inside your web page. Now let's see how to load external JavaScript files. Again, we need to use the script tag, but we need to use its src attribute, giving the URL to the JavaScript file. Now, why not just embed the code right there on the page? Well, there are many reasons why most of the JavaScript code that we use in a web page comes from separate JavaScript files. Alright, so let's first create a new JavaScript file. Let's call it hello world.js and write the test function first. Let me just copy this whole thing from the HTML. And now we can add the src attribute in this script tag so that the browser may load this JavaScript file. Because we have kept the file in the same directory, we can just use the relative URL like this. So when the browser loads the HTML, it will load this file from the same directory. Let's refresh the browser and we can see the alert message pop up. So as we were discussing, why is it useful for JavaScript to be kept in a separate file? Well, we not only use our own JavaScript code, but many times we use external libraries like jQuery or AngularJS, in which case they are hosted as separate JavaScript files, which we need to include. Alright. Even if we were writing our own JavaScript, quite a bit of the code may be reusable functions which can be used across web pages. So if we embed them directly in each page, we will need to copy paste a lot of code in all the pages, which also increases the page size and hence the page load times. Another issue could be your code is your IP, and many times you may want to protect it from getting copied, especially if you are doing a project for a client and they don't want the code to be easily accessible to everyone. If you embed the code directly into your web page, then anyone can just use the view source feature of the browser and see all the code that has been written. But if you externalize the code in a separate file, you can compress and obfuscate your code so that not only is the size of the code reduced, but it is also unclear to read. Of course, one can reverse engineer the code, but that is much harder to do than plain view source. And finally, the one big reason for using external JavaScript files is because the browser caches these static files like JavaScript files, CSS files, or image files, so that on subsequent request to the same file, it doesn't download it from the server, rather it just picks it up from the cache. So that makes pages load much faster because a few hundred KB of data may be saved from getting downloaded. So generally speaking, when you are writing JavaScript code, try to write all the functions inside a separate JavaScript file, but you may invoke the page specific functions inside the script tags in your page. Another recommendation is that when you are writing the source URL to your JavaScript file, try to use relative paths. Well, for the time being, instead of full URLs, because of two problems. One is that during development, you may be running your code on localhost server. But when you deploy the code into another environment, say production server, localhost won't work anymore. So you will need to find and change all the references to localhost while building your project for another environment. Another problem may be the use of the HTTP versus the HTTPS protocol. Let's look at the jQuery CDN URL. Let's search jQuery CDN URL and then go to the jQuery download page. Let's go to this using jQuery with CDN section and click on Google CDN. As you can see, it doesn't say HTTP or HTTPS. It gives the URL after the protocol. If you do this, then the browser will use the same protocol as the protocol of the page you are currently on, which contains this script tag. All right. Example, if I am on http://dezowie.com and I have used this script tag on my home page, then the script URL will be http and whatever URL is given here. But if the address of my page is https://dezowie.com, then the script URL will be https followed by whatever URL is given here. And this is very useful if you have enabled HTTPS SSL for your entire website, which is mostly the case. If you are accessing an HTTP resource from inside a page accessed securely over HTTPS, the browser usually cribs and displays errors or warnings that this page is secure, but it is trying to access some insecure content and whatnot. Alright, so I just thought I'll give this information here, although you won't need it right away unless you are deploying it on another environment. But it is always good to know of such pitfalls.